This episode was suggested by a listener, Elena, on Facebook. If you'd like to suggest a topic or just say hi, you can do so on Facebook and Instagram at Morbid Curiosity Podcast, on Twitter at Morbid Podcast, or on our website, www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com. Humans are fascinated by gore and violence, but even more so the mysterious and unsolved. This interest in disturbing and unpleasant subjects is called morbid curiosity, and it has gripped hundreds of people throughout the ages. I am one of those people. My name is Hallie, and this is the Morbid Curiosity Podcast. Imagine someone close to you, someone you trusted and depended on, told you that they thought they were being followed. At first, you might think they were misunderstanding the situation, but what if they were so adamant that you began to believe them? What if you believed them so fiercely you followed them into very dangerous situations, risking your own life as well as theirs, only to find out later that it was all a delusion caused by mental illness? It sounds like a nightmare that is on a rare occasion lived by victims of Folie à Deux. Folie à Deux is a psychiatric syndrome that includes delusional beliefs and sometimes hallucinations that are transmitted from one individual to another. Folie à Deux usually means the delusion is shared between two people. Folie à trois occurs when 3 people are affected, folie à quatre for 4, à plusieurs for more than 4 people, and en famille for an entire family that's affected. This disorder was first conceptualized in the early 19th century by French psychiatrist Charles Lasègue and Jean-Pierre Folie. Lasègue specialized in nervous and mental illnesses and considered psychology and physiology as complementary to one another. Folie believed in the dualistic nature of individuals, where the body and soul both affect the mind, and disturbances in either causes mental illness. Together, these psychiatrists defined Folie à Deux using the following criteria. It was a delusion that was transferred from one individual, the primary, to another, the secondary. The secondary often had no past history of psychiatric illness. Folie à Deux was more common among women. The people involved were very close, usually family, and lived in social or physical isolation. Also, the primary was often older and more intelligent than the secondary, and the condition seemed to appear without prior family history of psychiatric illness. They named the condition Lasègue-Folie syndrome after themselves. This condition was elaborated upon by Todd and Dewhurst in 1956, who noticed that those affected usually did have some family history of psychiatric illness, and perhaps a personal one as well. They went on to say that the most common form of the condition was between sisters. Several different subtypes of Folie à Deux were recognized over the years, and these subtypes depend on how the delusion is created. Folie impulsive is when one person, the primary, forms a delusional belief during a psychotic episode and imposes it on another person, the secondary, who may not have become delusional if left to their own devices. In this type of Folie à Deux, the secondary usually returns to their usual state of mind once separated from the primary and treated on their own. Folie simultanée occurs when 2 people independently suffer from a psychosis and influence one another's delusions, so that both delusions become strikingly similar. It can also occur when 2 people who are morbidly predisposed to delusional psychosis both trigger symptoms in one another. Folie communiquée is when the secondary has no previous incidents of psychiatric illness and starts suffering from the same delusional belief as the primary after resisting it for a long period of time. The secondary then maintains the belief even after separation from the primary. Lastly, folie à deux occurs when the secondary is already suffering from psychotic delusions, but adds new delusions to their own after associating closely with the primary. The delusions are usually similar to those of the primary and integrated with those already being suffered by the secondary. Most of the delusions suffered by those with folie à deux are persecutory, meaning the person believes someone is out to get them. But sometimes the delusions are considered grandiose, in which the person believes that they are famous, wealthy, enviable in some way, or blessed by God or another entity to give them special powers. More recently, the criteria for folie à deux, or as it's called now, shared psychotic disorder, have expanded and changed. Thanks to a review of all reported cases in 2006, it is now thought that there is generally no significant age or intelligence difference between the primary sufferer and the secondary, although the secondary usually does have a more passive personality, some type of cognitive impairment, a language difficulty, or is suffering from an unrelated life event at the time. Men and women are affected equally, although women are more often the primary, and both the primary and secondary usually have a family and/or personal history of psychotic illness. Social isolation is still a factor, as is the dependency of the secondary on the primary. The treatment for people affected with folie à deux has also changed. In the past, the two people affected were separated, and only the primary was treated with antipsychotic medication, while the secondary sufferer was supposed to be cured only by separation from the primary. It has now been determined, as the secondary is usually also dealing with some sort of psychiatric illness, they also benefit from antipsychotic medication and other therapies. Recovery depends on the depth of the delusion and the extent of the individual's own mental illness. Interestingly, despite the fact that mentally ill patients are often housed together for treatment purposes, folie à deux is rare within treatment context. It most often occurs within a family, most commonly between sisters and especially twin sisters. The most common non-blood relative cases are between husbands and wives. To this day, folie à deux is still considered a psychiatric curiosity. It was designated by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 4th edition, or DSM-4, as a shared psychotic disorder. The International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, 10th edition, or the ICD-10, describes it as a delusional disorder. The current DSM-5 does not include folie à deux at all, as it does not consider it a separate disorder from other psychotic disorders. The DSM-5 does state that a person cannot be diagnosed as delusional if the belief in question is one ordinarily accepted by other members of that person's culture or subculture. This is important as it takes into account the traditions of other cultures outside the Western world, something that was not done in the early days of psychiatry. It is often difficult to determine when the line is crossed between a legitimate belief held by a number of people and a delusional escape. When a large number of people come to believe in an obviously false and potentially distressing thing based purely on hearsay, these beliefs are not considered to be clinical delusions by psychiatrists, but instead are labeled as mass hysteria. A good example of this was the widespread belief in a completely fabricated 1997 report that stated that the measles vaccine, or MMR, gave children autism. This report was proven false and retracted by its author, who also lost his medical license, yet many people continue to believe in its credibility. There have been several well-publicized cases of folie à deux in the past years, but before we get into those, let's have a quick word from our sponsors. Our regular sponsor is Audible.com. If you have a long commute or are just too busy to sit down and read, you can still enjoy a good book with Audible.com. There are over 180,000 audiobooks to choose from, which you can listen to on your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or other MP3 player. MCP listeners can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial of Audible.com by going to www.audibletrial.com/MCP. You can also find this link on our Facebook page and website. If you sign up for the free trial, you get a free audiobook that is yours to keep, even if you cancel the service, and the MCP gets the funding it needs to keep bringing morbid history to your ears. Our newest sponsor is BetteWrorld Books. BetteWrorld Books has low prices on new, used, and rare books as well as textbooks. With locations in both the US and the UK, BetteWrorld can ship anywhere in the world for free with no minimum purchase. More important than getting a great deal, though, when you buy books from BetteWrorld, you help fund literacy. For every book sold on BetteWrorld, a book is donated to someone in need. BetteWrorld also helps to fund educational nonprofits and libraries. To access these great deals and fund literacy, go to bit.ly/MCPBooksUS for the US store and bit.ly/MCPBooksUK for the UK store. That's bit.ly/MCPBooksUS or bit.ly/MCPBooksUK. Another great new sponsor is ThinkGeek, the premier retailer for the global geek community. Express your love of Legend of Zelda, Star Wars, Dungeons & Dragons, Skyrim, and more with clever t-shirts and other unique apparel, home and office decor, electronics, collectibles, and so much more. ThinkGeek has great gifts whether you're into science or science fiction, and many of the items you won't find anywhere else. Just follow our link, bit.ly/morbidgeek, to search their massive collection of geeky gear. That's bit.ly/morbidgeek to get your geek on. And now, back to the podcast. While Folie Deux is relatively rare, there have been many case studies on those affected, reported in scholarly psychiatric journals. However, there have been a few cases that went beyond academic circles and made it into mainstream media. The case of the silent twins is a long and complicated one, and may be a case of the longest-lasting episode of Folie Deux ever reported. June and Jennifer Gibbon were twin sisters born in 1963. From a young age, they would only communicate with one another, supposedly because they were bullied terribly by their Welsh classmates, because they were the only black students, and because they spoke with a strong Creole accent that was hard for the other children to understand. June and Jennifer didn't even communicate with their parents and would become catatonic or unresponsive and immobile when they were separated. They did speak to one another and wrote many works of fiction, some of which were published. During their teenage years, they suddenly went on a crime and arson spree, which got them arrested. At their trial, the judge interpreted their grunts as guilty pleas, and they were sent to Broadmoor Maximum Security Mental Institution to fulfill a 14-year sentence. There they were put on high doses of antipsychotic medication, which did nothing even when they were separated. Eventually, their dosage was adjusted, and they were able to keep diaries, but never went back to their novel writing. Sunday Times journalist Marjorie Wallace became interested in Jennifer and June's case and began regular visits to Broadmoor. The twins eventually opened up to her and expressed both the desire to be free, but also the idea that they would never live an ordinary life unless one of them was dead. In fact, they believed it was becoming necessary for one of them to die. One day in 1993, Jennifer confessed to Wallace that it had been decided she was the one who was going to die. Not long after, on the day the two women were transferred to a more open clinic in Wales, Jennifer died. The cause of death was acute myocarditis, or a sudden inflammation of the heart. There was no evidence of drugs or poison in her system, and her death still remains a mystery. It is commonly thought that she willed herself to die. After Jennifer's death, June began to speak. She revealed Jennifer's speech had been slurred for days before she died, and that Jennifer knew she was dying. Wallace stated that a few days later, June told her she was, quote, free at last, and that at last Jennifer had given up her life for me. 13 years later, in 2008, June was living a quiet but normal life near her parents in Western Wales. She no longer needed to be monitored by psychiatric services and was accepted by her community and had finally put her past behind her. Another famous case of Folie Deux appeared in the news all over the United Kingdom in 2008, when Swedish twin sisters Ursula and Sabina ran headlong into traffic on the M6 motorway. In May, Ursula visited Sabina at her home in Cork, Ireland. For unknown reasons, the two secretly left Sabina's family for Liverpool. They took a ferry and then went to a police station to report concerns for the safety of Sabina's children. Why they didn't report this in Ireland is unknown, but the Liverpool police contacted the Dublin police after Sabina told them she had argued with her partner the night before. After their time with the police, the two boarded a bus headed for London. On the way, the twins told the bus driver they weren't feeling well and convinced him to leave them at a service station on the M6 motorway, one of the busiest motorways in England. The driver of the bus noticed their behavior was erratic and suspicious, and that both women clung to their bags very tightly and wouldn't let him search them when he became worried they were carrying something illegal. The bus driver told the manager of the service station about their behavior, who then called the police. Officers soon arrived, but after speaking to Ursula and Sabina, decided they were harmless. The sisters soon left the station on foot, walking down the central reservation of the busy motorway. Chaos ensued when they attempted to cross it. Sabina sustained injuries when she was struck by a car. The police were notified, as well as a television crew who were filming nearby. The two sisters dodged speeding cars to make it back to the median before the police arrived. When the police tried to subdue them, they fought them off and dove again into traffic. Both were hit, Ursula by a lorry or semi-truck, which crushed her legs, and Sabina by a sedan, which left her unconscious for a short time. Ursula was seriously injured, but still resisted the police, screaming at them that they weren't real. Sabina also resisted, attacking the police with what was reported as inhuman strength and screaming that they were after her organs. She beat her way through several officers and took off again, but was eventually sedated and arrested. Both women were brought to a hospital. While Ursula received treatment, Sabina was processed by the police. There was no trace of alcohol or drugs in her system, and she had no history of mental illness or past criminal activity. During the processing, she continued acting very odd and did not seem concerned about her sister, who was in intensive care. Sabina was released later that day. Shortly after, a man named Glenn Hollinshead saw her wandering the streets of Stoke-on-Trent, searching for the hospital where her sister was. Being a paramedic, he noticed her nervous behavior and offered to let her stay at his place until she found her sister. Sabina went with him, but once they arrived, she began acting erratically again, constantly looking out the window and saying her cigarettes might be poisoned. The next day, when Hollinshead went next door to ask his neighbor for tea bags, within moments of returning to his house, Sabina stabbed him to death and again fled, this time with a hammer in hand. As she ran, Sabina started hitting herself in the head with the hammer. A passing driver spotted her, got out and tackled her to try and stop such disturbing behavior. She threw him off just as the police arrived, and she again fled. She ended up jumping 40 feet off a bridge onto the A50 road, breaking both ankles and sustaining skull fractures. She was taken to the hospital and arrested there. Sabina later pled guilty to manslaughter with diminished responsibility due to insanity. During the trial, she never explained her actions, her only reply being no comment. The defense claimed Sabina was a secondary sufferer of Folie, influenced by her sister. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison and was released on parole in 2011. Ursula returned to Sweden not long after she left the hospital, and not much has been heard from either of the women since. Another famous case of folie à deux involving an entire family occurred in Australia in 2016. On August 29th, Mark and Jacoba Tromp and their 3 adult children, Rihanna, Mitchell, and Ella, vanished from their farm in Sylvan, just east of Melbourne. Their house was left in a state of orderly disarray, as if they had been looking for something specific. All of their phones, passports, and car keys were left behind. 4 days after their disappearance, Mitchell returned by train, having made his way to Sydney after escaping the rest of his family. He told police that the family had fled after his parents had become convinced someone was after them. Apparently, the anxiety they felt had built up due to everyday events, and the day they fled was the day they snapped. He said he didn't feel as if he were in danger, but wanted to keep track of where his family was going. They had considered fleeing the country, but worried their passports would be tracked. Therefore, they made everyone leave their phones behind so they couldn't be tracked via GPS, and fled in Ella's car to get as far away from technology as possible. They were headed to the Janalan Caves in New South Wales, 150 miles west of Sydney. Mitchell had secretly brought his phone with him, and when he was discovered, it was thrown from the window of the car. Ella suddenly appeared at home not long after. She and Rihanna had left their parents at Janalan and headed to Goulburn. There they got separated, and Ella ended up stealing a car and driving back to Sylvan. She arrived while the police were searching the house. Rihanna was later found in the back of a car on the side of the road. She was in a catatonic state and was taken to a hospital by the owner of a vehicle. A week later, Jacoba was seen wandering around a New South Wales town called Yaz in an agitated state. She was taken to a hospital after she tried to book a hotel, and the staff recognized her from the news. Ella's car was found abandoned in Wangaratta, with no sign of Mark left behind. A young couple playing Pokemon Go late at night spotted Mark running from the ditched car, but lost him in a park in the darkness. He was apprehended a few days later. The family stayed separated for a few weeks while they were treated for mental illness and processed by the police. Hundreds of theories circulated about what may have sent the family running, ranging from real money troubles to poisoning by farm chemicals. It was later reported that after a buildup of pressure from running their farm, the parents felt they were being followed. They convinced their children to come with them, but the children soon realized something wasn't right with their parents and went for help as best they could. Mark later stated he'd suffered a mental breakdown and dragged the rest of the family with him. Another possible case of folie à deux was the Slenderman stabbing, which we talked about in our Slenderman episode with Dr. Kita. The two girls who stabbed a classmate were socially isolated, and it's thought that one induced the other to believe they were both proxies for the folkloric character Slenderman. Check out our episode on that story if you're interested. Dr. Kita was a great guest and specializes in the study of folklore, especially Slenderman. Because these events catch our curiosity, a lot of media has been created that tries to explain and explore them. June and Jennifer Gibbons' story was told in a 1986 BBC drama called The Silent Twins, and in a 1994 BBC Inside Story documentary about June called Silent Twin, Without My Shadow. Marjorie Wallace wrote a book about her experiences with the twins called The Silent Twins. I really recommend this book. It's fascinating, but also quite heartbreaking. It contains excerpts from both Jennifer and June's poetry and their diaries. The story of Sabina and Ursula's experience was documented on CCTV and by the television crew that was on the scene at the time of the incident. This footage was used in a 2010 BBC documentary called Madness in the Fast Lane. This is available to watch in full on YouTube and is very interesting. There was also a film directed by Aaron Rottinghouse called Apart, which came out in 2011. In it, two people suffer from shared delusional disorder, and the film follows them as they dig through their own past to discover the root of their issues. These incidents draw our attention due to their disturbing nature. However, we are only disturbed because we cannot understand why those affected did what they did, and we cannot imagine such a loss of control over our own mental state. That is why it brings out our curiosity. The Morbid Curiosity podcast was produced by H. Lloyd. If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a morbid topic for me to talk about, you can tweet the show @MorbidPodcast or find us on Facebook and Instagram @MorbidCuriosityPodcast. If you like the show, please share us on social media and give us a rating on iTunes. Thank you to Justine, Phaedra, William, Ruth, Juliana, Wes, Lisa, Troy, Allison, Morris, Carrie, Becky, Elena, Sigrid, Tomorrow, Kat, Rachel, Renee, Jana, Kelly, Heidi, Jess, Marie, Lena, Skylar, and Michelle on Facebook for your comments, your participation in the polls, and for sharing a bit about yourselves with us. It was great to get to know you a bit. Thank you to Kevin for recommending a great book and to Diana for a suggestion via the MCP website. Thank you to the 23 of you who subscribed to the MCP on YouTube. And thank you to Lydia, Neville, Bailey, Aaron, Amber from the Can You Not podcast, and Lone Star Law and Disorder podcast for welcoming me to Australia, recommending the MCP, and making some great suggestions on Twitter. And finally, thank you to KWKR for your review on iTunes. Thanks to you, the listeners, our creepy community is growing. The MCP is part of a wider creepy community known as the Belfry Podcast Network. Check out the other shows on the Belfry Network at www.thebelfry.rip. If you like this show, why not support the MCP with a donation? We can't continue the podcast without money, and your financial gifts go to the research materials we use to create this podcast. If you'd like to donate, you can go to our website, www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com. There you'll find a donation button where you can set up a one-time donation or a monthly repeating donation. Any amount helps. Just $5 a month will help keep us going and likely cost less than a large latte from your favorite coffee shop. Another way to help is to check out our sponsors, Audible, ThinkGeek, and BetteWrorld Books. When you purchase their products through our links, we receive funding, and that helps us keep the show going. The links for all of these sponsors will be posted on our Facebook page as well as our website. We really, really appreciate your support. My name is Hallie, and until next time, thanks for listening.